Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. You already know what's going on today. Jon Stinchcomb stops by here in just a little bit. Pretty important update on spring practice. That comes as a part of our program here today. And as you are aware, at least many of you are, Georgia hosted a major list of recruiting visitors here this weekend. It certainly seems like that 2025 class for Georgia been kind of lying dormant here for a little while, but it may be getting ready to kick into high gear. So what do you say we get ready to get kicked into gear there as well? Of course, we're glad to have you with us as we get started today. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Seems like a lot of Georgia fans have been playing the waiting game as of late. Obviously, Georgia still celebrating the fact that I had the number one overall recruiting class in 2024. Kind of the hay got put in the barn officially on that a few weeks ago, sort of the final kind of national signing day in February. Old school, you don't really do much on that anymore, but that was kind of the lid for Georgia on that 2024 recruiting class, and it kind of clinched that number one class for UGA. And now as the weather warms up, as has been the tradition the last few years, this is also the time in which recruiting starts to heat up a little bit as well. And as you move towards the start of the summer, that's really become the epicenter, if you will, for when recruiting classes come together. And for a lot of Georgia fans, while they're still really, really happy about what Georgia did in 2024 and thrilled about the fact that so many of those guys are already on campus, really almost the full, entirety of the class almost, going through spring practice, some of them slated to perhaps be significant contributors almost right away. While Georgia fans are still loving that, there's also that kind of pins and needles nature of, okay, what's next? And that's always been the number one question that every Georgia fan asks after you get the big commitment. Hey, what's next? And after the 2024 class is put away, that sort of what next mentality exists for Georgia for the class of 2025 there too, because it seems like you've been kind of lying in the weeds here a little bit, waiting for the next big domino to fall. But we certainly believe that in the coming weeks and perhaps the coming months, a lot of those dominoes are going to start to fall. In fact, this weekend, I think we may look back on that and say, hey, that's the spot where the momentum started to spin. That's the moment in which some big things started to go down for Georgia. We talked to Jeff Sentell about this on Friday, our DawgNation recruiting insider. And one of the words that Jeff Sentell used in that interview, and if you go back to listen to it at DawgNation.com, you can hear this, is the idea of we sort of might be at a little bit of a crossroads here, where some really big names are to choose either between Georgia and somewhere else, or perhaps in some cases, Georgia going to decide, are we going to go all in on this guy, or are we going to perhaps maybe cast a little bit of a wider net and maybe not quite be so specific about an individual name? Those are the decisions that are being made right now. Players making a decision about what's best for them, Georgia making its own decisions about where its priorities are going to lie. And perhaps when you think about what has happened since you and I last spoke on Friday, the biggest thing to occur was the visit that David Sanders, the five-star offensive lineman out of North Carolina, that he took to Georgia on Saturday. The sense that you get, this was a good experience for him, and Georgia needing to provide a good experience for Sanders is probably pretty important, given the fact that right now, of the elite sort of, very high four-star, five-star names that are out there, perhaps Sanders represents, and this is, a tough case to make, but perhaps arguably it's true, the most contested recruitment currently out there for Georgia Sanders because of the pursuit that he's getting from another suitor not too far up the road from where Georgia's located. In fact, to sort of set the stage for all of this, let's go back and hear Jeff on Friday talking about, as he describes it, the war that's about to take place for Sanders recruitment. Take a listen to this.
The huge name this weekend, Brandon, is David Sanders Jr. Man, that's just going to be a war. We've talked about this before. We devoted a lead segment on Before the Hedges to it about a week ago, where Georgia and Clemson, David Sanders saw Clemson first over the past weekend, and now he's going to go see Georgia. And David actually told me, Brandon, that he feels this visit to Georgia this weekend where he sees spring practice and he watches Coach Searles coach his dogs and how the dogs respond to Coach Searles, and just really wades into the waters of a Georgia practice to see if that's for him, if that's what he needs, if that's a good fit. He told me that he thought that was going to be more important to him with sizing up Georgia, a Georgia program that's already checked every box for him, to see how big of a fit that is. That's a more important visit this weekend for David Sanders Jr. and his family than the official that's going to come this summer.
I want to park on that just for a minute. It sort of seems like we're still early days of the 2025 class. Obviously, signing period doesn't begin until the end of the calendar year. But what Jeff says is that this weekend, the visit that Sanders took to Georgia on Saturday was going to be as pivotal a moment for him as anything that would come later on in the summer when you sort of think about it being kind of decision time. Jeff says it's actually this visit to sort of see this practice taking place, to see how Stacey Searles is working, to sort of feel the vibe around Georgia. That's perhaps, as Jeff describes it, more important than anything that's going to come for him after the fact. Now, every intention or every sort of piece of evidence we have suggests that the visit for Sanders this past weekend did go really, really well, that Georgia did have that chance to make the positive impact. My guess is Jeff Sintel will be writing more about this very soon there at DawgNation.com on that very point. But to sort of accentuate why this matters and why, as Jeff described, this particular weekend going to be so important, because right now you do have that hot pursuit by Clemson. And a name that Georgia fans know well, Matt Luke, now as the Clemson offensive line coach. The backstory here being this is the one area in which Clemson has not recruited well. They have not brought in offensive linemen at the same rate that in the past they brought in defensive linemen, or at times they brought in high-profile quarterbacks. Offensive line has always kind of lagged behind. In the presence of Matt Luke and the experience he got recruiting at Georgia, that's one of the things that Dabo Swinney's trying to do to change that. They've had a couple of opportunities recently to have David Sanders up there in the upstate and impress him while on campus and sort of accentuate the point of why, as Jeff describes, the visit that Sanders took to Georgia was so crucial. Let me show you this from Steve Wiltfong from 24/7 Sports on Twitter, or X, I guess we call it now, describing just the other day about the visit that Sanders takes to Clemson. And the quote that Sanders gave Wiltfong, the national reporter, about that visit to Clemson just a few days ago, the main thing I wanted to get out of the visit was seeing Coach Luke in action. It was a sight to see, Sanders says. Obviously, Georgia fans know Luke well. David Sanders goes on to tell 24/7 Sports, that really impressed me the most, just the way the guys worked and responded to his coaching style. So that's the sort of A/B test that's going on for David Sanders right now. Got a chance to see Matt Luke to see how he works. Gets a chance to see Stacey Searles on Saturday and see how he works and how that full padded practice for the first time in the 2024 spring to sort of see what that's like. And we'll have our ear to the ground to listen about more about kind of how the impact that Georgia was able to make on David Sanders. Early indication was it seems like that went pretty well. Now, that's not the only kind of major moment for Georgia in the 2025 class playing out right now. In addition to a guy like Sanders perhaps choosing between Georgia and Clemson, you've also got a big choice that's out there as it relates to five-star quarterback Julian Juju Lewis. And at one point in time, it seemed like, and you want to go back to when, Lewis first announced his commitment to USC, or when some of the chatter about him being a 2026 recruit at one point in time. It sort of seems like Georgia was very much on the outside looking in of Lewis's recruitment. But ever since Lewis kind of reclassified himself as a 2025, it feels like the vibe around Georgia and Lewis has been a little bit different. And perhaps Georgia is a little bit more of a factor in the Lewis recruitment than it otherwise was. In fact, going back to Friday once again, Jeff Sintel saying that there really is behind the scenes some belief that some momentum might be growing with UGA and Juju, who's perhaps the most talked about recruit in the country right now, regardless of class. A reminder of what Jeff said for us there on Friday.
There's some indications that Julian is at least considering it. The flip to Georgia. He's talking to Georgia commitments. He's talking to wide receiver targets across the country where they're trying on the shoe, I guess. They're trying to test drive out about everybody playing together. And that's something that I think is significant. Of course, he had a great visit to see Georgia practice yesterday because Georgia was getting after it. You heard about how Mike Bobo was really, really chippy. James Coley was really chippy, really coaching the guys hard, getting them ready. Coach Smart obviously had some ivory soap moments while he was over the microphone as well. So I don't expect any visit to Georgia, especially with a recruit like Julian, to go bad. But the culture was really important.
So Jeff describes there the fact that the Lewis visit apparently went well. We also have some tangible evidence to back up what Jeff says, because shortly after the unofficial visit that Lewis took this weekend, the second he's taken since reclassifying, if I'm counting correctly, we have some tangible evidence to suggest that visit must have gone well, because shortly after that, Julian Juju Lewis, and we'll show this on the screen for you, has already kind of punched his ticket for an official visit to Georgia right there, final day of May, kind of stretching into the very beginning of June. That weekend sort of overlapping the end of May to begin the month of June, which has become historically sort of the biggest weekend, for official visits for Georgia and a lot of other programs there as well. That's when Julian Juju Lewis is going to be on campus. And it seems like right now for Georgia, this is a very real possibility. And to also go back to the word that Jeff used on our show on Friday, get a little bit of a crossroads situation here for Georgia, because you know the backstory. Last year, Georgia goes all the way to the end with Dylan Raiola, only to lose Raiola sort of at the last minute. Georgia kind of went all in on Arch Manning the year before in the belief that they had a very good shot of winning that recruitment. Ultimately, that didn't happen. So Georgia has gone after the biggest possible trophy at the quarterback spot the last two recruiting cycles and come up maybe just a little bit short on both guys. Is it ready to do that again, take that risk for a guy like Julian Juju Lewis? Or is perhaps a guy like Matt Zollers, who is a very good prospect in his own right and perhaps a little bit more accessible, perhaps a little bit more attainable without the very difficult needle to thread that might be the Lewis recruitment? That's part of the overall decision that Georgia's making here right now. But the one takeaway is that the ball might be somewhat in Georgia's court on this, because it certainly seems like right now the idea of flipping Lewis away from USC, to the extent that he's even still considered a USC commit, that is a very real possibility for Georgia. Now, let me sort of wrap up all of this way, because when you read what Jeff's going to be writing and when you listen to what the social media chatter is and sort of what the online, folks are saying, I think it can be a little bit difficult to process all of this and sort of figure out what it all means. So let me tell you what I think all of this means here for right now. We are at a time in college football where it just seems like chaos abounds. There's change coming left and right. Many of us believe a lot of that change may not always be change for the better. And there are some programs who are perhaps having a hard time keeping up. They're sort of caught up in the change. They are perhaps swallowed up by the change. And there are a lot of programs sort of figuring out, can we still be what we were in this new age of college football? Well, in Georgia's case right now, the best almost any of us can tell, that's not what's going on. There is chaos in college football, but for the most part, Georgia is not a participant in it. And this recruiting weekend for UGA feels very similar to what a recruiting weekend would have felt like a year ago or 5 years ago or when Kirby Smart first started. But somehow, some way, Georgia is able to maintain a business-as-usual mindset in a recruiting weekend like this, even though the landscape around recruiting could never be more different than it currently is. And if you're a Georgia fan, I think you need to view that as a very good thing, because business as usual for UGA is a great thing to think of when business has been as good as it continues to be for these dogs. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We're happy to have you with us today, no matter how you get to us, live on video across all platforms at 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref, podcasts, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. You click in there at Apple, you click in there at Spotify, you're a part of our podcast. It sort of lands right there for you by noon every day, and you're glad, hopefully, to have that. We're certainly glad to have you with us for it. And a big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia, who make this show possible for you there today, there as well. Energy-efficient windows and doors, that is what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. We're kind of coming up on that time of year in which the air conditioning units are on, and you know how expensive that can be, especially these days, it seems. And obviously, when your energy bills are sort of getting higher and higher and higher, you're kind of thinking about, what can I do to kind of give myself a little bit of a break in terms of some of that cost? Is there a decision I can make that maybe can help save me some money on my energy bills? Well, that's where the energy-efficient windows and doors of Pella Window and Door of Georgia comes into play. It's not only a great way to take care of what might be the number one investment in your life, your own home, where you live, your source of your financial, investment. But it's also just a great way to be comfortable on the inside of your home, knowing that AC that you're paying so much for is not, escaping out of the house because improperly fitted or just, inferior product of windows and doors. No, with the Pella windows and doors, you're going to stay comfortable on the inside. You're going to be looking great on the outside. And that's why you want to have a conversation with one of those Pella experts today. You can stop by and see them at their Experience Center right there in Duluth. You can kind of put your hands on the product and sort of feel what makes it different. Or you can give them a call, 678-638-1429, 678-638-1429. Call them and say, hey, come to me. Come bring one of those Pella experts to my home. Sit down. It's no pressure consultation, just a chance to learn everything that Pella can provide for you. You can also find them online, PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. Just let them tell you about great savings right now. Between now and the end of the month, you can get 20% off your project or no money down, no interest, no payments for 12 months. Also, just make sure you tell them that BA from DawgNation Daily sent you to them and that I said they would take great care of you, because I truly know they will, because I truly know that Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. We've got Jon Stinchcomb here coming up in just a moment. Good, fun conversation to have with Jon here, especially when you think about an elite recruit, kind of choosing between a Matt Luke, choosing between a Stacey Searles, which of these two offensive line coaches running the better spring practice here right now. Kind of a fascinating deliberation perhaps taking place in the mind of a prospect like a David Sanders and others there as well. So we'll talk more to Jon Stinchcomb about that here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, I want to go around the doghouse. Poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And, of course, y'all know how much I love having Dr. Pepper a part of what we're doing here at DawgNation Daily. And I want to go back and kind of follow up on a story that I believe we talked about on Friday. We gave you a little nugget from a practice report that Connor Riley had written at DawgNation.com. And at the time I told you, let's put a pin in this and come back to it. Well, the moment we're going to come back to is here right now on Around the Doghouse, poured by Dr. Pepper. Connor writing about Mykel Williams, but the blurb about Williams also included something else. So what Connor wrote is, Mykel Williams was bouncing around between outside linebacker and defensive line. He said as much during his interview on Tuesday, essentially confirming that's what he would do. But Connor Riley also wrote at DawgNation that he was joined by another member of the team, the five-star freshman Jonah-Ajonye, who is also going from drill to drill with Mykel Williams. Connor says that Jonah-Ajonye's size really stands out for someone who's only 17 years old. Now, for me, and honestly, maybe we'll ask Connor about this tomorrow, or Mike when he joins us on Wednesday, for the people in Athens, how surprised they may have been by this. I have to say I was pretty surprised by that. Not that Mykel Williams was working at outside linebacker. That's what we would have expected. But in the case of Jonah-Ajonye doing that, to me, that's not quite what I would have expected for him. In fact, I would have assumed that Mykel's move to outside linebacker was creating the opportunity for more playing time at Mykel's old position, defensive end, for a guy like Jonah-Ajonye. So there's a part of me that has to admit I'm not really quite so sure what to make of JJA, Jonah-Ajonye, working at OLB, outside linebacker. That's not quite what I've expected. I think the simplest takeaway, though, even though this is a big dude and Connor says noticeable size for someone who's just 17, I think it speaks to the overall level of athleticism that he possesses. This is even a consideration of what he might be able to do. And to sort of further that point, I loved one of the things that Zion Logue said the other day. When Logue worked out as a part of Georgia's Pro Day, Logue also met with reporters. And in the midst of that discussion, was talking about some of what's left behind at Georgia as he now moves on to the NFL. And one of the names on his mind was Jonah-Ajonye. And in the final days of Zion as a Georgia player, the incoming five-star freshman apparently made a very sizable impression on Zion Logue. You'll love this. This goes back to last week. Take a look.
He surprised me during bowl prep. Just some pass rush things that, like, being 17 years old, man, just like he has a motor for days. And once he finally gets his college weight and gets to moving around, he's gonna be good.
So I love that because, I mean, I think that Zion Logue is a guy whose opinion really matters to me because I like the way that he played there at UGA, and he's saying some very nice things about Jonah-Ajonye, and we kind of add that into the intrigue of, could he really be an edge rusher kind of playing in a stand-up situation? I don't quite know ultimately what the future holds for him on the football field, but I would say that it also kind of speaks to the overall, I think, the position value in the eyes of some players. That just sort of more fun to be an edge rusher. It's more fun to be an outside linebacker. Sometimes the defensive end spot sort of feels like you're doing a little dirty work. You're kind of getting your hands dirty a little bit. You're getting down there and you're sort of being more of a blue-collar, lunch pail guy. And, maybe for Georgia here this year defensively, there's a little bit of a chance to kind of recast that or perhaps, reframe that a little bit, because ultimately I think one of the things that caused Georgia some trouble with a year ago was when they were having a hard time setting the edge defensively for whatever reason. People have kind of trying to diagnose what that was. When they were having a little bit of a hard time, stopping those rushing yards, kind of on the outside there, it created a situation where Georgia up front defensively was perhaps more vulnerable than it's been at any other point in time, certainly in the recent years of the Kirby Smart era. And you get the sense that that's one of those things that Georgia wants to kind of shore up here as you move into 2024. And whoever's left over at defensive end, if McKell's playing some outside linebacker, it sounds like Jonah-Ajonye would like to do that too. Whoever's kind of still playing defensive end, the role they could play in helping Georgia stop the run could make the defensive end position really important for Georgia once again. And with that in mind, I want to go back to Zion Logue here for a minute, because in talking about the way that he's presenting himself to NFL scouts right now, he used a really interesting description. He was talking about his own ability as a run stopper. Now, Logue plays in the middle of the defense. He's not a defensive end. But the overall idea here, I think, still holds up pretty well of, listen, I want to show myself as a run stopper, and if we're really good at stopping the run, then good things can happen for Georgia. I love the way that Logue described this last week, and I think it fits in really well with the conversation we're having right now. So let's see Zion Logue one more time here.
I'm stopping the run. I know if I stop the run, we can have some fun on third down. And when I came in, Coach Scott, he told me that was going to be the biggest building block that I needed, in which I did. So, and when I turned that on, my game kind of flourished.
I love that phrase from Logue. He says, listen, if we'll stop the run, we can all have some fun on third down. And that's ultimately what it's about, right? And, why does Mykel Williams want to play outside linebacker? In simple terms, it just seems like a more fun position to play. Perhaps the NFL pays that position better too, I guess. But it just sort of seems like more fun to play. Why would Jonah-Ajonye want to kind of stand up and go play over there too? Maybe to him, it just sort of seems like it's more fun to play. Or maybe, it's the Georgia coaching staff who thinks JJA is fun in that role. Either way, sometimes it just sort of seems more fun to stand up, be the edge rusher, than to put that hand on the turf and be the defensive end. But if you can take care of your business stopping the run on first down and second down, then everybody can have more fun on third down because you have a chance to get the quarterback a little bit more. The perfect example was that in 2021 when Georgia had 49 sacks on its way to a national championship season led by a defense that rightly is in the discussion for being the greatest of all time. And part of what made that defense so great is they were impenetrable against the run on first and second down. It made third down a lot more fun for everybody, fun for them to play, fun for us to watch. So the bottom line here is I do get why there's a gravitational pull towards an edge rush position or any spot on the football field that seems a little sexier and seems a little bit more fun. I get all of that. But Zion Logue's words, I think, are pretty wise, even though it's only a short sentence. That, listen, if we'll stop the run on first and second down, there's plenty of fun for everybody to have on third down, regardless of whatever position you happen to be playing. And that is Around the Doghouse here today, poured by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, I'm like a lot of y'all in the fact that my weekends, I'm running around all over the place. My daughter's got gymnastics, my son's got baseball, and I love every step of them, every minute of it, right? It's like all the country songs say. You got to enjoy every second of it, and I'm trying my best to do that. But I'm also worn out going from place to place to place. So you better believe my little pick-me-up and my little kind of, treat to myself in the middle of doing all of that is the great tasting, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. I am enjoying that every single time I'm out there going and doing anything because that is what Dr. Pepper is for me. So go to your local Kroger, be like me, go wherever it is you're shopping for groceries and pick up that same great flavor that I'm enjoying all the time, the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. In fact, there's 23 different flavors in a Dr. Pepper. That's why you saw on the can there a moment ago. See that number 23 right there? That's what that means. And knowing with the 23 flavors, that is a pepper thing. So make sure you enjoy some Dr. Pepper like I do each and every day. And, of course, it's great to have Dr. Pepper as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. All right, we've got a lot to do on our program today. Before we're done, in fact, we'll do this coming up in just a few minutes. I've got a special invitation to you. Now, this is going to be a haphazard mess. I make no promises about the efficiency of this, but I do want to try to have some fun in kind of a laid-back, casual way. So I'll tell you more about that here coming up in just a little bit. For now, though, on everything as it relates to Georgia, spring practice, what's going on, what's going down, let's cover all of those bases and more as we welcome in Jon Stinchcomb today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always great to have Jon Stinchcomb here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. His insight always so valuable. Seeing him on video these days has been really fun, too. He's always sitting behind his, what's the Ron Burgundy line? Leather-bound books, rich mahogany. There's such a stateliness to Jon's desk that he shows up with each and every week, which is befitting of the former All-American and certainly a very classy guy. So, Jon, good morning to you. Thanks for being on the program today. We hope you're doing well.
I'm doing great. This is the closest I can get to having an in-studio look. I try to put some football, some Georgia stuff, make it feel appropriate.
I love that. We were just talking a moment ago about, so Mikael Williams kind of cross-training at defensive and outside linebacker. We sort of expected that. Joseph Jonah-Ajonye apparently doing some of the same kind of thing there. And maybe I'm reading into this a little bit, but it speaks to me, Jon, there aren't just some positions that are sort of thought of as the fun positions, and there's some positions that are sort of thought of as the blue collar, sort of lunch pail, sort of working class positions. And, unfortunately, football team, you got to have 11 guys all playing the same, level of commitment. And so you got to have guys do the hard work. And in a 3-4 defense, the defensive end spot is sort of that hard work position. Perhaps there's not as much glory. Now, you can be the number one overall pick, as Trayvon Walker proved in the 2022 NFL draft. But am I on the right page with this, that one of the challenges that football coaches always have are guys want to gravitate towards what seems like the sexier spot and perhaps away from the position that provides a little less individual glory? Is that why we're seeing some of this, cross-training going on? Or is this simply a matter of, getting guys in the place where they can be perhaps the most impactful?
I think it's the latter more than the prior. I think for a guy like Mikael, it's how can we get him on the field more? And you look at the way defenses, just like offense has, there's an evolution that has occurred. And you see so much more versatility from the defense, specifically with Georgia. You're looking at a transition from that space between the guard and the tackle to outside the tackle's edge. And the way Georgia plays it with their 3 down front, it gives that outside edge player more versatility. Can he be in space? Yes. Can he rush the passer? Yes. Can he set the edge? Yes. And the ask is to be able to do that, not only from a 3-point stance, but also from a 2-point stance, from off the ball. The ask is a little more dynamic than what we've seen in years past. I've tried to do a little bit of a film study to understand better what Georgia does defensively, to understand their adjustments in coverage, to understand the ask for particular players. And the edge player, it's almost a misnomer to define them as just outside linebackers or just defensive ends. Their roles cross between the two. The ask of which and the demand at which they have to play, they have to be able to, cover in the curl flats area. And they also have to be able to set the edge when flow comes their way. So I think this gives them an opportunity to get more dynamic playmakers on the field for extended periods of time. As Zion was talking about, you earn the opportunities to rush the passers in clear passing situations. Obviously, 3rd and long is one of those situations. But being able to play with a 3 down front means that outside linebacker, that edge player, still has to be a factor in the run game. So when you've cross-trained guys, when guys have trained in that more traditional defensive end from a 3 down front position, they understand the importance of being a factor in the run game and how that factors into their ability to get in more advantageous situations to get after the passer.
Yeah, I loved the way that Zion Logue said that in the clip we just played, because I think it really kind of sums it up in a very appropriate way. Georgia probably took a little bit of a step back with its rush defense this past season. They were kind of, like 20th or something in like yards per rushing attempt, which is for Georgia is a disaster. That's still, probably 89th percentile in America or 80 something percentile in America. But for Georgia, that's not where you want to be. And you and I believe talked about that last week. And so part of the motivation here is it's just, good to stop the run. But if you can, as you said, sort of force those obvious passing situations on third down, well, now everybody, to a certain extent, can kind of pin their ears back a little bit more. You could be much more aggressive on third down. And that is, I would just say, objectively speaking, a more fun brand of football. It's sort of, to me, like what Georgia looked like in 2021 when the typically sound Georgia defense also had, by far and away, the most dynamic pass rush of any point in time in the Kirby Smart era. And John, from my standpoint, it's not a coincidence. That was, not just the best defense in Georgia history, it was one of the best defenses in college football history because they were pairing up the certainty of stopping the run with the dynamic play of, and we can also get after the quarterback as well.
Yeah, and it starts with being able to stop the run. I think case in point was this past year's SEC championship game. There were times where I think everyone in that stadium knew Alabama was trying to run the football, and the challenge was on Georgia to stop the run, get the ball back into the offense's hands. And Alabama liked that matchup. And that's not a situation that Georgia finds itself in often, is an opponent, whether offensively or defensively, is looking at a position group or a style of football and says, we've got the advantage here. I think that was the case, humbly and regrettably so, that Alabama lined it up and said, you know what? Everyone in the stadium knows we need to, especially late in the game, we're gonna run the ball to seal this win for them, and they were able to do it. So it's a rarity to have guys like Jalen Carter and Trayvon Walker and Jordan Davis, guys that have earned the opportunity to take away aspects of an opponent's offensive attack, and that starts with eliminating the run game. Only in blowouts is it you can just, the offense can take a team out of the run game. In those big games where it's the heavyweight matches, the teams that we plan to play against in late season play, you're going to have to do that, dictate that with your personnel groupings, not just the fact that, overall you're just a better team. And what we saw this past year is, this is an area that Georgia can improve. And it sounds like, they continue to bring in the right pieces to be a factor there. But it certainly is a point of emphasis of trying to get the right guys on the field so that they can earn those opportunities to get after the passer.
I want to talk to you more about spring practice here for a moment and the position that you would know better than any other along the offensive line. It seems like right now Georgia is rock solid with its left tackle, Ernest Green. I think he's a really good player. It seems like Jared Wilson's sort of the guy at center right now. The work he's been doing over the course of last year appears to have earned that opportunity for him. And then when you look at, Tate Ratledge back, he's obviously your right guard, which leaves two positions that I think are pretty interesting. Let me start with left guard here for a moment, where it seems like there's going to be a pretty intense competition ongoing between Dylan Fairchild and Micah Morris. Now, Georgia's probably also going to play both those guys, I would guess, a lot during the season because Georgia has rotated a pretty good bit along the offensive line last couple of years. But I like Dylan Fairchild as a player, and yet there's also plenty of reason to believe that Micah Morris is a pretty promising prospect too. You have any thought on that competition right now between Morris and Fairchild there at left guard? Because it seems like, I don't want to overstate this, but it seems like to me Georgia's got two starter-level players, but obviously at that position you can only play one at a time.
I agree. I think they're both starting caliber. I think they're SEC quality interior offensive linemen. Now, their games are distinctly different. Micah Morris is arguably the strongest football player. I don't know what he looks like in the weight room. I know what he looks like on a football field, and he can straight up maul folks. He can move people, heavy, big bodies, interior, move them off the ball. Now, Fairchild, a little more of a hybrid, effective in the run game, but also probably more athletic, moves well in pass situations. I don't know what he graded at in pass percentage-wise, but it had to be pretty high up there. So I think he's probably a little more polished than Micah is, but Micah's got that raw power that very few players possess. So when you're able to sharpen two guys in different ways, and that competition lets them compete for the very best, I think that really bodes well for Georgia. I think either you'd feel confident with either taking the field, obviously with the development of Ernest Green over this past year on the field. I expect him to continue to get better as a player, to understand what his strengths and weaknesses are, and just play more confident at times. I thought, later in the season, you saw a much better player just because he was less hesitant. It looked like he was playing with that confidence that comes with reps. And I would expect him to only get better. So continuing in a long line of highly talented offensive linemen that Georgia produces, I think part of that comes with the competition that exists and the ability for them not only to compete with the high level and high quantity of great players on that defensive front, but also in that same room of having guys that can push you and understand that your starting position is not a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, how about the right tackle spot with that in mind there as well, where it seems like Xavier Truss, he's obviously the veteran. I think you've praised Truss before in this space, is going to get that first look there at right tackle. But there's also this thought that, Monroe Freeling could be ready to make a pretty big move here. And it seems like some of the reviews in terms of how Freeling's performed during practice and, perhaps when he's, played, have been pretty good as well. What do you make of the battle between the veteran, who we've all seen plenty of at a couple of different spots, and a guy like Freeling, who perhaps a lot of Georgia fans, I'll probably put myself in this category too, kind of hungry to see a little more of? What do you make of the Freeling-Truss battle at right tackle right now?
Yeah, I would say Monroe Freeling's ceiling is higher than Xavier Truss. And the question is, where is he in his development? And it's a challenge because Xavier Truss is a guy who's been in every fire that there could possibly be. He's played across the board. He's been that versatile piece that Georgia continues to put out across the offensive line, guys that are able to move from inside to outside and do so in a way that's effective, and you don't see a huge drop off in play. I do think that, that there's a little bit of a ceiling with Xavier, that there's opportunity for other guys that maybe have a little more body control and athleticism to compete for that space that he fills at times. But, I'm not bashing on the guy. He plays at a high level. He's done so for a long time. I think it's the better question is, how far along is Monroe in his development? I think we saw, there was athleticism, there's movement skills. The question is, has he continued to fill out that frame? And is he ready to play in, play out, week in, week out, every Saturday, compete at the very best that this nation has to throw at an offense? Is he there now? Is he already at that space to push Xavier Truss and give Georgia that flexibility to have now 7 guys that are starter caliber, and you're just finding the very best 5 and knowing that, it's a war of attrition. As many games as these guys play in a season, it's very unlikely that starting 5 that starts week 1 is going to remain all season long unscathed, and you're not going to have a need for that 6th, 7th, and sometimes 8th guy to be ready to step up and not have a drop off in play.
And then one more thing about spring practice here right now is the way in which obviously we knew the transfer wide receivers for Georgia going to be in the spotlight a little bit. It seems like the guy generating the most buzz right now might be Colby Young. Obviously, there's size there, the ability to make those contested catches. Like, how important is it for Georgia to kind of find, whether it be Young, who seems to be the dude that's sort of generating the most buzz right now, or a guy like Humphreys who's played in the SEC, or just somebody? How important is it for Georgia to kind of bring in one of those transfer players and make him an impact contributor to go along with the guys who were transfers a year ago that have now been here for a full year, and Anthony Evans and everything else? How important is finding somebody to make a big contribution from that collection of transfer receivers for Georgia in the offense here this year?
Yeah, I think what you're looking at now is how can we utilize their individual skills? They were brought here for a reason. I think that's the beauty of the transfer portal, is you can look at a player's skill set, what they were able to do at a collegiate level, highly competitive for both those individuals, teams, or at least the competition that they've seen, and say, how does that fit in what we have? What Georgia has done really across the board, wide receiver room is no exception, is they deploy a number of players. It's not the same 3, X receiver, Z receiver, slot receiver. that you see every drive. You see a mix. So finding the guys that can stretch the field, finding the guys that can make plays across the middle and those yards after the catch. I mean, there is a different skill set that you got from a guy like A.D. Mitchell or George Pickens than you did a Ladd McConkey. And so understanding how they complement one another, for the layman on the outside, you look and you say, oh, they're wide receivers. But understanding the game and what you need and how they complement each other as to, the route tree and what they can do, that matters. And so I think what you're looking at is what's the best deployment and how can we utilize these guys' skills in space. Dylan Bell's another guy that, last year they were figuring out ways to get him the ball. He obviously bailed out Georgia's team at times with injuries at the running back position, but it also kind of allowed him to say, hey, I'm a guy, you get the ball in my hands and I can be a dynamic playmaker. So this spring ball is important for a number of positions. Wide receiver room is no exception. There's so many guys with high potential. It's what do we need to do to put them in positions to succeed, and how do they fit the system that we want to have in place come August?
I think that's really interesting. I want to finish with this. We talked before you joined us today about one of the recruiting battles that's out there for Georgia right now involving David Sanders. Big-time offensive line prospect. Seems like this is one of those that Georgia's obviously gotten very used to winning, but obviously wants to win for this cycle there as well. And in particular, the thing interesting about Sanders right now is recently seeing Clemson practice, saw Matt Luke. That's a guy that you obviously know very well. Georgia fans all sort of feel like they know Luke pretty well. This past weekend, got a chance to see Stacey Searles there as well. So, John, I want you to put yourself, if you don't mind, in the position of a guy like Sanders right now. If you're watching Luke and then watching Searles, what do you think the contrast between those two coaches might be for a recruit like this that could really sort of swing the balance of momentum for the Georgia class if he were to choose Georgia over a program like Clemson that's currently recruiting him very, very hard?
Yeah, I think both are truly talented, some of the best offensive line coaches in the country. Having seen the product that they both put on the field and kind of understood their backstory and where they've been, the development of players, I think very highly of Matt Luke. And I think one of the biggest advantages for Coach Searles is the product that has been put in the field, on the field, and the streak that Georgia has of producing and developing offensive linemen. Matt Luke has been a part of that. The difference is, he's now at a program in Clemson that does not have, have they jumped the shark? Are they still relevant in the national scene? Whereas Georgia, that's obviously not a question. The practice that you get, the development of players, it's second to none. And offensive line is certainly not an exception in that space. I think very highly of Coach Searles. I think of the job that he has done of not only, that's a big shoes to fill coming after Pittman and Luke and returning to a team that you have some familiarity, but the bar has been raised since you've left. And what they were able to do last year was a good product and the number one recruiter, right? I mean, how do you recruit guys? You show them what you do. You show them the development for the other players. And for a guy like Sanders, I think you look at an Ernest Green, you look at a Monroe Freeling, you look at Dylan Fairchild and some of these younger guys and say, man, they've really progressed. And I would expect more of the same come this season. So on the recruiting trail, it obviously matters who is running the show, especially in your position group. And both are great. And then as you look outward, the Georgia program, in my opinion, is in a different space as Clemson. So an easier recruiting chip to fall in that plate when you're trying to compare apples to apples.
John, I love it. Great insight. I appreciate that as always. So good to have you here as a part of DawgNation Daily here today. Have a great week. We'll look forward to having you back here on the program again very soon there as well.
I always appreciate it, BA. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs too, John.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, love Jon Stinchcomb. Love his insight on all that. Great to have him as a part of the program today. Hey, I've got something fun for all of you here in a moment. An invitation for you to be a part of something Will it go perfect? Probably not. Will it be fun? Hopefully so. That's the reason why we're doing it. I'm going to tell you more about it here coming up in just a little bit. To set all that up, though, let me remind you that we're cruising around the SEC right now, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. It means Dog Nation Cruise is getting close. Just a few days away, a couple of weeks away, on board Allure of the Seas, having a great time on an Oasis-class ship. And as you hear me talk about that, my invitation to you is to keep in mind that a brand new Oasis-class ship is going to debut in the month of July. It's going to be called Utopia of the Seas. It's a brand new Oasis-class cruise ship sailing right there out of Port Canaveral, just like Allure of the Sea is going to do for us. Let me tell you why that matters. It's because I live here in the Atlanta area. Many of you do as well. And when I'm looking to cruise, typically speaking, I'm going to be cruising out of Port Canaveral because it's really easy to get to. I like the convenience of a cruise vacation with Royal Caribbean. I like the fact that I can hop in the car and drive down and sort of be there. Now, back in January, did fly to Miami to be on Icon of the Seas, which was really great too. But typically speaking, I'm thinking about how do I get the maximum use out of my time? And that's one of the things that's cool about Allure of the Seas right now. And it's really the reason we selected it as the cruise ship with Royal Caribbean for our Dog Nation cruise here for 2024, because it's easy to get to right there at Port Canaveral. You just hop in the car, you drive past Orlando, you're essentially, right there at Port Canaveral where the ship sails from. Always really convenient. And if you're kind of thinking about that as a good sort of port of embarkation for you, Utopia of the Seas in July, the same kind of fun we're having on our own Oasis-class ship, Allure of the Seas for the Dog Nation cruise, you can have that on a brand new cruise ship. They're starting in July. So check out Jessica Slater. She's a travel agent who was kind of introduced to us by Royal Caribbean because Jessica has a lot of intimate knowledge of Royal Caribbean, which means she can make your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation all the more enjoyable. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She can tell you everything you need to know. All right, couple of things here. NCAA tournament, field announced yesterday. Couple of thoughts from me on this just generally. We don't do a ton of basketball talk, so I'm not going to pretend to be Joe Lunardi here for a moment. But I do think from an SEC-centric standpoint, the most interesting thing with the upcoming NCAA tournament, what does Tennessee do? Knocked out of the SEC tournament right there at the very beginning. Rick Barnes historically has had his issues there in March. Tennessee, as an athletic department, seems to have its issues in all sports, in games that matter, in chances to move on and advance. So we'll see if Barnes, has a tough time there with this here once again. This team's been fun to watch. The transfer they took in, Connect, has been obviously an amazing player in the SEC here this year. But seeing can they actually make something happen in March, that's going to be fascinating. If that's true for Tennessee, it's even more true for John Calipari, whose relationship with Kentucky fans just seems to be standing on thin ice a little bit. This is a guy who's been, eliminated early from way too many NCAA tournaments as of late. Certainly for a place like Kentucky that expects to win, they're just not doing nearly enough of that. I believe that Kentucky plays in this tournament with a great deal of pressure. That's also true for one of the one seeds, Purdue. You know that. They've been knocked out by kind of bottom-feeding seeds now 3 years in a row. They're obviously trying to avoid that here this year. I think it sets up to be a pretty interesting NCAA tournament overall. There's obviously a lot of chatter about a team like Indiana State being kept out of the bracket in favor of a program like Virginia. This is just what the committee does. They put in the power teams. And if you're not quite the power team, you're just not going to make it, whether that be Indiana State or even a Big East team like Seton Hall, which probably has better wins than some of these other teams, but it's still just Seton Hall. Pretty easy for this committee, operating as they typically do, to exclude a team like that. We also talked last week about Trev Alberts leaving Nebraska to go to Texas A&M, kind of a high-profile, departure from your alma mater to go take some money from A&M. And lo and behold, you've got A&M playing Nebraska in the men's tournament. You've also got A&M playing in Nebraska in the women's tournament, which gives you an idea that the committee certainly has some fun with the matchups that it puts together. It tries to pretend that it doesn't, but we deep down always know that is the case. There was also the weird thing this week about Greg Sankey being interviewed by, I believe it was The Athletic, kind of hinting at the idea that one day they may break away and do their own sort of power conference only basketball tournament. I can't tell you how distasteful I find this to be. And it's not because I think that you shouldn't go after the money or whatever else. I mean, obviously, I'm certainly in favor of free markets and things like that. I just think it's really, really short-sighted to think that you can create a tournament that would function better than this tournament does. Complex systems are incredibly difficult to understand sometimes. And there is a level of popularity about the NCAA tournament that can't be easily explained by any one thing. It's not just the brackets, although that plays a big part of it. It's not just because a lot of different people, no matter where you went to school, feel like you've got some sort of stake in all of this, although that's certainly a part of it. And, to sort of flippantly say, we feel like we can, go do this better, or at least hint that you might be able to. I just think that speaks to a level of arrogance that I find really problematic about Greg Sankey here right now. I openly root for Sankey because I'm an SEC homer. I also think there have been a lot of moments in the past where Greg Sankey's proven himself to be a very capable commissioner and probably the person best suited overall to be the leader of college athletics into the future. But when you're saying things like this at a time in which the entirety of college athletics, the foundation upon which it rests, is so uncertain and unstable, to me, you're demonstrating that you might not exactly know what time it is right now, and I think that's pretty concerning. Greg Sankey's words overall, a little concerning for me that you're thinking about this at a time in which college athletics, as we know it, needs to be saved. Sankey probably best position of anyone to be the person to save it. But it's not obvious that he wants to right now. He seems to be worried about other things. Now, on a much happier note, let me say this. We haven't done this in a good number of years. And this isn't a clever idea. This isn't a new spin on this. This is just something I want to do. I think we have a graphic that we can throw on this screen here about this, I believe. We're going to do a DawgNation Daily Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. Why am I going to call it the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge? Because I'm going to kind of update this during the Golden Shoe time of the show. Now, you can see by the quality of this graphic that this is not something we put a whole lot of work into. I made the graphic, so I have to take the take the L for this. It's not a very fancy graphic, which gives you an idea. The entirety of this is going to be very, very laid back. There is no sort of interesting twist on this. This isn't Warren Buffett giving away $1 billion or anything like that. In fact, this is all just for fun. But if you would like to be a part of a bracket challenge with us here on DawgNation Daily, here's what I want you to do. I want you to send your name, your email, your mailing address, and your phone number to me, brandon.adams@dawgnation.com. So you can tell by the graphic, this is not some fancy thing. I don't have 1,000 people helping me out with this. I'm just going to do this myself. Now you may say, well, BA, why do I have to give you all that stuff? For a few reasons. First of all, we're going to have a couple of different prizes that I'm going to tell you about. One of these is going to be, I'm going to invite the winner of the bracket challenge to come onto the show and celebrate for a couple of minutes, celebrate being the winner. So I need a way of contacting for that. I'm also going to try to give out a few other prizes there as well, which I'm going to need your mailing address to be able to send you. So send me your name, send me your email, send me your mailing address, your phone number to my email address, brandon.adams@dawgnation.com. This is going to be a haphazard mess because I'm running this myself, but I do think it can be fun. We haven't done this in a few years, and I want you to be a part of this. And if you win, you can come on the show. And I'm going to try to give out a few other prizes there as well. So this is probably the sloppiest bracket challenge of any media company running one. I can promise you that none will be more sloppily executed than this one will be. But I do believe it'll be fun. I'm going to try to give away some prizes. All of this of my own doing here. This is just something we're doing for fun. There's no money involved. I don't have any money to give you. There's no money involved, but it is going to be fun. And I do, sure enough, would love to have you be a part of this. And so send me your contact information. I'll be reaching out to you, and I'm going to get you involved in our bracket challenge here. And whoever wins, I'm going to bring in the show, and you can do a couple of minutes of taking a bow for your college basketball knowledge. Does that make sense? So one more time. My email address, brandon.adams@dawgnation.com. Send me your name, your email, your mailing address, your phone number. I'm going to try to get you some good prizes here for all of this, or at least a prize for all of this, and we'll get you involved and help have some fun here as a part of our DawgNation Daily Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge. Hope you'll be a part of all of that. Let me also squeeze in a couple of other things real quickly there as well. We did get the 14-team playoff finalized. The only thing I thought was kind of interesting about this is, and I don't know enough to say this, necessarily full-throatedly, but it seems like the expansion of the 14-team playoff, the additional inventory, it seems like that didn't come with a whole lot of extra money. Like, I find that to be kind of interesting that supposedly everything in college football today is about money, and you're going to do what makes you more money. But isn't it interesting that some of the moves now don't seem to be bringing a lot more on sort of a per game value from ESPN, who for whatever reason college football has decided they want to be the lone media partner in all of this. Doesn't that seem interesting? At least it does to me that you're pushing for more and more money, and yet it seems like the actual financial return on some of these very, very radical changes is not quite producing what it maybe once would have. So there you go on that. We'll follow that, make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, before we're done, I got some good news, I got some bad news as it relates to UGA athletics. And perhaps we should have put air quotes around good news. You may be aware that Georgia has made the postseason for the first time, I believe, since 2017. Georgia will play in the NIT. In fact, not only will they play, they'll host a game in Stegman Coliseum against Xavier. I'm led to believe the reason for this is due. By the way, we got a nice video coming in from the SEC basketball tournament. This is a pretty good video here for a topic about Georgia hosting Xavier in the NIT that took place because Ole Miss decided they didn't want to. So Ole Miss had the chance, they didn't want to, and now Georgia's like, okay, we'll take it. We'll go to the NIT, which in a roundabout way, if I were to put the most positive spin on this at all, and I do think if you're a Georgia fan right now, it is very fair to ask, where do things stand with this Georgia basketball team? And are they set up in any way to be better next year? Not just better, but much better than they were here this year. I guess the lone positive you can take from this, at least they want to play, right? It's like if these are a bunch of sort of transfer guys who are already sort of on to the next thing, then maybe sticking around and being a part of this, maybe that just wouldn't make much sense to them. The fact that they want to play in the game, apparently they do, more so than Ole Miss anyway, that's at least worth something, I guess. I'm not going to try to oversell this, but Georgia will be playing postseason basketball for the first time in quite some time. Also, when I was a kid, some of you remember this, Georgia used to hang NIT banners. One of the coaches, I think it was Tubby, was like, we're not hanging banners at the NIT anymore, which is probably the right thing to do. And they haven't done that ever since. But there you go. So Georgia back in the NIT tournament. On the other side of that, much, much worse news for the Georgia baseball team. And we said this over and over again. Now, you can't put the blame for this on us. We said over and over again that stepping into SEC play was going to be a major step up in weight class. Did I think that Georgia would get pounded 3 times by Kentucky? No, I guess I probably didn't. But rough weekend for the Diamond Dogs up there in Lexington. Hard time throwing strikes. Gave up too many runs. Had the 4-0 lead on Friday, and it was just all Wildcats the rest of the way there. So tough start to a SEC slate there for Georgia. Honesty compels you to admit. But that is the story for UGA Athletics after kind of a weekend where you've got a lot of different teams involved. Now, softball team doing much better, so we'll give them credit, beating Alabama, I think. But listen, not a great time for the Georgia baseball team, but the basketball team is at least going to the NIT. And as we wrap up here today, a very interesting golden shoe. Now, this is a serious situation. I don't want to make too light of this, but obviously some Georgia students apparently did some very good things. Lucy Bowers-Boykin, who's in our audience on a regular basis, she shared this with me, and I want to share this with all of you. So Lucy says, this was like 10 to 15 minutes from where I live, and John Bateman, who obviously works at Georgia, put this out, that so proud of these amazing young ladies of the UGA Kappa Alpha Theta sorority, 5 incredible heroes. What the Burke County Sheriff's Department puts out was the amazing students of the University of Georgia who courageously saved lives during a recent car crash. Young women observed a white SUV leave the roadway and roll over into the creek at Ellison Bridge Road. They quickly turned around, went to the crash site, and without hesitation jumped in the water and pulled the driver and 2 children out of the vehicle. That is, as described by the Sheriff's Department here, quick thinking and bravery. Indeed, that's the case. Lucy, thanks for sharing with me. And how about these Georgia students? Man, doing an amazing thing that obviously will impact lives for the rest of their lives. What a cool thing here. And John Bateman obviously made everybody aware of that. So we'll give golden shoes all the way around there. Scary situation that turns out to be kind of a happy ending, I guess. So there you go. Lousy stinking Gators, our Gator hater updater. Florida does make the NCAA tournament, but just like football, we don't think they'll actually win anything as a part of it. 1,227 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia in football. That's the number that matters. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. I'm going to start on YouTube today. We'll see what people have on their mind here. Foster Moss says he's glad I wasn't the one because I can't swim. First of all, this is a callback to a previous topic, and I certainly take umbrage with the thought that I can't swim. I may not be able to swim great, but I can swim. But very funny, Foster. Very, very funny callback. Taylor Russell says heroic. That is indeed. I mean, listen. I mean, that is an incredibly heroic thing to do. Now, listen. If you ever come across an accident like that, you got to be careful, of course. But truly, in this case, it seems like they really saved some people's lives, which is a very good thing. Let's see. Randy Payne checking in from Tifton, Georgia. Randy's going to be on the Dog Nation cruise with us. We always love having Randy here with us. You love that for sure. DMart42, yes, I thought the Dogs might have something, but Kentucky just crushed us. Yeah, I mean, just giving up a lot of runs. You got to give yourself a chance to win, giving up a lot of runs. Baggins and friends also with the basketball team taking Ole Miss's leftovers. Yeah, probably not. I'm not going to, probably not the finest moment in UGA athletics history that, like, Ole Miss is like, it's beneath our dignity to go to the NIT tournament. And Georgia's like, UGA. It's probably not the greatest moment in Georgia history that the celebration takes place because Ole Miss decides it didn't want to go. But listen, I don't know. Let's see what else. Foster Moss says, I'm trying to jinx myself into a good tourney. I can't even tell what they're talking about here. Paul Moon says, I don't need to talk myself down. Well, so, like, everybody's got strengths and weaknesses, right? And, listen, hope, when it comes to my weaknesses, the one thing I do know is anything that sort of relates in sort of the organizational phase of life is just not where I'm going to shine. Like, ideas, execution, you get my point? So this is sort of one of those things we just wanted to do for fun. DMart42 said I made that graphic my old BlackBerry. That's at least probably pretty close. This is one of those deals where, like, I can't quite tell what I'm usually pretty good at sort of like pre-reading the comments and sort of deciding what they're about. Some of these I can't quite tell where some of you are going today. Yeah, I can't quite tell. Let me come back over to YouTube in a moment. We'll give that platform a chance to stabilize. DT says, way to go, ladies of Kappa Alpha Theta. Is it Theta? Is that how you say it? Theta? As you might imagine, I'm probably not super acquainted with Greek life. DT also predicts that Joseph Jonah-Ajonye could be eventually next in line to become one of those Georgia first-round picks. That's fun to consider. Yeah, so DT also wondering if Mike White's the Billy Napier of basketball. I think it's too soon to make any kind of grand proclamation about Mike White. I really do. But I also believe that this is what makes the NIT thing a little tricky. It used to be, you want to go back to like old days. Let's say you're a relatively new football coach. You love the idea of making a bowl because the old line was, man, that's a whole month's worth of practices. That month worth of practice, that's so valuable because that's the kind of thing that your team can use as sort of like a pre-spring practice. And you'll use those bowl practices to sort of get ready for the next year. And I guess there's a line of thought that would probably be somewhat similar when it comes to the NIT tournament too. But as many of you are aware, I mean, the team changes over, all teams in college basketball change over so much year to year. You're sort of left to wonder if that's even really possible anymore. So I really don't know what the value of the NIT is. I'll tell you a true story. My son is 12. He's a big sports fan. And this is sort of based on a joke that I believe he just thought was real. My son the other day was talking about the NIT tournament, and he honestly thought NIT stood for not in tournament. That's what he thought the NIT actually stood for, which I think is really funny. I guess that's a joke that he'd heard, and he took that literally. But even if that's not technically what it stands for, that's essentially what it means. But Xavier is in some real trouble coming up in a few days. I can promise you that. Matt Rugavina says that, how about Nature Gator trolling me for attention on Twitter? Yeah. I feel like Nature Gator in our comment section is oftentimes not too bad. Whatever version of Nature Gator we get on X is just, with all due respect, is not good. It's not good. What he's really doing, he's trolling all of y'all. He goes in the mentions, try to stir y'all up. Jamie Huff says that this first part is true. He says, UG and our fans, we got no right to look down on any basketball tournament, which is true. He says, we also need the reps, and success could mean retention. I'd love for that to be true, because, I would say that Georgia's got some players that you would like for them to come back next year. So, Jamie, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. Caleb McCollum asked a good question. He says, do you think we'll have a 1,000-yard receiver this season? I really think that Dylan Bell absolutely has a shot at it. I think that Dylan Bell absolutely has a shot at it, too. In fact, Dylan Bell would have been my pick to be leading receiver for Georgia this upcoming year. It seems like some other people are saying something different at times, but Bell would probably still be my pick overall. Here's what I don't know, though. And this may be a good problem. It seems like right now Georgia's got a lot of guys who are perhaps in somewhat of a similar category. Like, a lot of people think that Dominic Lovett could really benefit from there not being a Brock Bowers, that creates more time for a slot receiver on the field, which creates more production for him. People will remember he had a very big year at Missouri, final year with the Tigers in 2022. Terrence Edwards has touted Ra Thomas, a guy who, as many of you are aware, played in a very different offensive system with Mike Leach at Mississippi State, and perhaps a year after that, just a little bit more ready to make that contribution here. Perhaps, that's the case. As I talked to Jon Stinchcomb about, people talking up Colby Young right now. There's a discussion about that. Anthony Evans has been talked up. There's a discussion about that perhaps the situation for Georgia receiver is a little bit too balanced right now to produce a 1,000-yard guy. And maybe it just sort of stands to reasonable if Brock Bowers couldn't do it, then perhaps no one on this team is sort of set to do it here right now. I was actually kind of thinking about this morning a little bit before the show, that what might be a better judge is the total number of receiving yards for like your top 3 wide receivers or your top 3 pass catchers. That might be a better overall judge. The total passing yards for Carson Beck might be a good judge on this too. And as I've been saying over and over again, can Georgia throw more touchdown passes? I have a sneaking suspicion that if Georgia could find a little bit more balance between the rushing touchdowns and the passing touchdowns, they found pretty good balance between the overall offensive production. But if they could also find a way to balance the sort of way in which Georgia scores touchdowns, not to nitpick a touchdown, but if they could find a little bit more balance there, it could make the Georgia offense a little more unpredictable, which could also make it a little bit more unstoppable as well. Winfred Steinspring checks in, says still listening but not always commenting. Glad to have you here. He also points out in the old days, the NIT was a big tournament. Yeah, I'm not old enough to know this, but at one point in time, the NIT was sort of the tournament, right? And eventually the NCAA tournament sort of overtook it. Yeah, that's the right grammar. Oh, yeah, and Timothy Wilson also mentions Arian Smith, who I think has gotten some pretty good buzz here thus far. In fact, I think that Smith is sort of seen as one of the first guys in drills the other day, which I don't want to make too much about necessarily, but maybe a good sign of kind of where his health is and where his level of leadership is at the moment. Jamie Huff wondering if Beck's going to be more accurate on his deep throws to get, as he calls them, the gas yards. I guess so. I guess I think of Beck as being a pretty deep thrower. And I don't know what the overall stat on the throws 20 or more yards down the field is, but that's a situation where 40% is probably pretty good. 40-something% is probably pretty good. How far off was Beck even on that? I guess I don't really think of Beck as being an inaccurate deep thrower. I know there were a couple moments in which he missed guys, but I don't think of him really being that way overall. Scrolling up here on Facebook just a little bit. Let me go back over to some of the comments section. Let's try YouTube again. Let's see if this is stabilized over here. D-Mart says playbooks would holds rah-rah back. He says Mike Leach offense is close to pro style. Lovett might just – yeah, so, I mean, my read on the Leach offense is not pro style at all. I mean, I think of that as sort of like a – and I'm not – I mean, I know obviously, Coach Leach is no longer with us, which is, always the kind of thing that hangs over this conversation. But the Leach offense, my understanding is very, very particular, almost akin to like what a triple option offense might be. In other words, the way you're playing in a Leach offense is sort of specific to a Leach offense. And that rah-rah, I think, had a good bit to learn about, how to fit in an offense like this. I think that was probably the case. And a year later, just more ready to be able to do that. I made the comparison of the day. Think about Tyke Smith. Shows up for the 2021 season and by all accounts was just not quite ready. Then he gets hurt, and then, he's kind of waiting for a while. And I think a lot of folks kind of put Tyke out of sight, out of mind, and then Tyke for Georgia in 2023, especially statistically speaking, ended up having a really good year. I could see a Lovett or a rah-rah having similar type of impact. In fact, DeMar, kind of a little critical of Lovett. I definitely think playing in the Eli Drinkwitz offense, it's an offense that really features slot receivers very well. I would say that Georgia doesn't feel the need to do that quite as much, but I still think that Lovett's probably a pretty good player. Jonathan Aaron says, I told you need to stop talking about the baseball team before you jinx them. Yeah, see, here's the problem. Like, I know the jinx thing has been sort of an ongoing type of deal. I do want to talk about the other sports. I want to normalize talking about other sports. Now, the show is always going to be 99% football because that's what the audience wants. This is, not a hobby after all, to use the Kevin Kisner line, another former Georgia athlete. This ain't no hobby. But so I can't, when it comes to the Georgia baseball deal, we said that over and over again. SEC play would be different. SEC play would be different. SEC play would be different. The basketball thing we had some fun with just because when it first started, we've never really had another sports team that's really given us a real legitimate reason to talk about them very much. So I get the idea about the jinx thing, but at the same time, like I want to be able to talk about some of the other sports teams. And if one of these teams could be good enough to give us a real reason to talk about them, obviously I'd be thrilled about that. Foster Moss says, can I scroll up and see if I agree with his comment? All right, let me find Foster. Oh, so Foster says Lovett's going to get 1,000 yards. He says he had 600 yards last season. It didn't even look like he was trying. Plus, he's added games. Plus, with the added games, he says we better have 1,000-yard rusher wide receiver. That's interesting that if Georgia plays a longer season, that will factor into the stats. That's pretty interesting to consider. 1,000 for Lovett. That'd be I would not have – I know that in his career, Lovett's come closer to 1,000 than any player on the Georgia roster, I believe, including guys who played other places. I would not have Lovett as my top choice, but it is certainly an interesting take. And to be honest with you, I guess I didn't – 600 yards actually more than I realized he had last year, so that's interesting. Now, listen, in Foster, I always love bold predictions like that. Love them always. So – you come in here, you make a bold prediction, you made a strong case for your point of view. I can't ask for anything more than that. So I think it's a good job. Paul Moon says rah-rah looks like a dude. Now I will say in Paul's case on this, that was one of the things that I took away from near the beginning of last season is how good he looked going through warmups. Rah-rah Thomas has a really nice look, I would say. Paul also says, I'm mostly hyped for Colby Young and Anthony Evans, two guys that I would say right now, early buzz, giving you good reason for that, maybe. No idea, he says, if they'll be the leading receivers, but both of those guys are different skill sets. I like that description, Paul, I really do. Lance says, if Lovett gets the catches that went to McConkey, he might make that 1,000 yards, but I also hope there will be more options in the receiver core, which I think is a fair point there, too. Johnny Surf Dog says, for our Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge, third place is a case of finished long drink. Second place is a Kroger chicken dinner. In first place, you win Jeff Santel's dog peaches. That's very funny. Very funny. Frederick Meredith says, did London Humphreys transfer already? Because I rarely hear him mentioned. Yeah, I think we're just getting started with spring practice here right now. Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint said some nice stuff about London the other day, I think, when Rosemy-Jacksaint spoke after Pro Day. So you can go to the DawgNation YouTube page and hear some of that. I really feel like Humphreys is my underrated. Like, you remember, do you ever, I grew up with like, back in the day of like the cable super stations. We had WGN. I used to watch a lot of Cubs games, but the White Sox were also on there too. And was it Tom Paciorek or Ken Harrelson that had the pick to click? I would say that London Humphreys is my sort of under the radar pick to click because he has played in the SEC before. And just like Foster was talking about, Dominic Lovett having a quietly productive year compared to other freshman receivers. London Humphreys had a quietly productive year. He's probably the second most productive freshman receiver in the SEC last year. So that'd be my kind of pick to click, under the radar pick to click. Cassie Turner says first prize in our bracket challenge is going to be me giving away my spot on the DawgNation cruise. Listen, I love all of you, but I got to hold on to that one myself for sure. Mark Woodmansee says if Carson throws over 4,000 yards this season, then we'll win the national title, no doubt in my mind. I do think it's a little bit of a different overall kind of playing personality for Georgia, one far more, driven by quarterback than it's been in the past. Let me go back to DawgNation.com, see what they're doing over here. Randy Hall wondering if we can do an event in Buford soon. I'd certainly like to, Randy. I'd certainly like to be able to do that. PDT says he sees London Humphrey being a Ladd McConkey replacement on third and short. Out passes for first downs was also vital many times last year. The thing to remember about McConkey, too, is now, McConkey did some of that, but this was also a guy that got behind defenses very well, too. National championship game against TCU comes to mind for me on that. The DawgNation.com comment section was sparse today. G. Gray says he thinks that Ra could be wide receiver one. Our buddy Terrence Edwards certainly thinks that. Good to see Cassie Turner here today, by the way. Randy Payne on Sting's last match. I didn't get to see it, but I heard it was good. And by the way, you talk about it's kind of a new era. First of all, wrestling has been great lately. Not everybody likes wrestling. I totally get that. The build-up to WrestleMania, I think, has been really good. I really, really do. This has been, to me, it's been really fun. I think they've done a good job with it. But the other day, how about, it used to be that, like, WWF, back when it was known as that, they wouldn't mention any other kind of wrestling. And, it's like you just don't mention anything else but yourself. And the other day, they gave a little shout-out to Sting for his last match. It was really interesting. If you go back and see this, maybe you're watching when it happened. Michael Cole, who's the broadcaster, it's like, hey, how about the great career of Sting? Congratulations on the last match. And then Pat McAfee started going in on how good the match was, and you could tell Cole cut him off. It's like, well, listen, we're not going to promote the product. We're just going to shout out Sting or move on because Sting was wrestling for his last match for the organization known as AEW. And so it's kind of cool to see him give a little bit of a shout out to Sting, but also really funny when they gave the shout out and McAfee tried to kind of go into more detail. Cole cut him off and kept right on going, which was very funny. Cassie Turner says, I'm happy that I'm back. I've been working 6 days a week and only had time to pop in every once in a while. Well, listen, Cassie, we appreciate you working hard and appreciate you popping in here when you can. Listen, that's what we live for, right? It's like the thing that I take such value in for the work that I get to do is accompanying all of you as you're out there kind of taking care of business, doing what needs to be done. The fact that I get a chance to kind of go along with you on that and that you would allow me to kind of be your distraction during all of that, boy, I take that really seriously. I really do. I appreciate that. Frederick Meredith says, y'all remember the Minnesota Wrecking Crew? We indeed do. And speaking of sad, wrestling news, Ole Anderson of the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, he recently passed away there too. Frederick Meredith has also been working 6 days a week lately, it sounds like. D-Mart says he doesn't have any expectations for London Humphreys. I don't really quite know what my expectations are, but I do believe that he may be a little underrated right now. I do believe he may be a little underrated. Let me go back over to Facebook, and we're going to get ready to wrap up after that. Winfred Steinspring says, how about the winner gets to guest host? We'll do a guest appearance. I don't know we'll do a full-on guest host, but we'll do a guest appearance. And listen, if you win the bracket challenge, you deserve that chance to come on here and take a bow. That'd be awesome. Yeah, but we'll definitely give you a chance to be on the show. Andrew Hughes says, can we do a raffle for a Coach Kirby Smart signed ball this year? Maybe donate proceeds to a local charity. We could raise a lot of money for a good cause. Andrew, that sounds like a really nice thing to do. I like that idea. Maybe we can do something like that. I think it'd be a good idea. Mike Mazzell has sent his email. He's going to be a part here. Timothy Wilson asked a good question. What about Lawson Lucky? I have to admit, I don't really quite know, because I do think that Georgia's going to have two tight ends on the field a pretty good bit. I'm really high on Oscar Delp. I think Oscar Delp's a very good player. I don't believe that Georgia would have brought in Ben Urasek unless they had the thought of really wanting to use him and give him a real shot here. And he's been a two-time all-conference player in the past, in the Pac-12, of course. Lawson Lucky, when healthy, has been thought to be a real legitimate kind of playmaking style tight end. So I guess this is competition, whereas I'm assuming that Delp is going to be on the field plenty. And as far as, is it Lucky or is it Urasek that ends up getting the sort of pass-catching opportunities that are also out there for a second tight end as well? I mean, Georgia wants to be as deep as it can at every position group, and so that seems to be what's going on there with the tight end spot. But, how does Lucky fit in now that you've brought in Urasek? Now, Urasek's not here yet. He doesn't get here till the summertime. So maybe that's some of that, too. It's Urasek will work his way into a contributing role, and maybe Lucky, because he's, got a year and a half head start on him at Georgia, maybe that gives him the advantage early. Maybe that's what that comes down to. But I do believe there'll still be a decent number of two tight end sets. And I do believe that Oscar Delp could be in line for a very good year. Now, very good for a guy like Delp looks different than Brock Bowers, because Brock Bowers may have been the best guy to ever play the position. But Delp, very, very valuable. Like an all-SEC level tight end. Could I see Oscar Delp being all-SEC level this year? I absolutely do. Matthew Dills, happy to see Charlie Warner coming home to Atlanta. I agree with that, Matthew. I think that's good. And I think the Falcons deserve some credit for bring him in. If you're a Georgia fan, being happy that the Falcons did that, giving them a little positive reinforcement every now and then, probably not a bad thing to do. Matt Rukavina says, if you get a perfect bracket, will you submit it to Warren Buffett so we can all collect our $1 billion? Yeah. I think it's one of ever since Buffett did the $1 billion deal, I think it's been one of the interesting things, because when I was younger, I'm talking about my 20s, I really followed college basketball. I used to love the sport, loved college basketball. And I always look at my bracket, and looking back on it, you always realize what an unrealistic expectation for success I had, because I thought I knew the sport, man. And when you understand the math of just the sheer number of possible outcomes, the combination of results, the sheer number, it's in the trillions, right? I mean, I think we've all learned a little bit more about the math of all this in recent years. Chad Williams says, I'm excited for the Falcons next year. We've got a quarterback again. They do, and they may not have a draft pick because of the tampering, which is the most Falcons thing ever. Oh, my gosh. You do something good. You bring in the player, and it seems like he's been well received here thus far. And then, lo and behold, you end up getting into a little bit of a tampering fiasco here. Strange, very strange. All right, we're going to go for now. Keith Ritchie says he wrestled in high school with Ole Anderson's son, Brian. He was a tough SOB, he says. I'm guessing he probably was. It was very interesting on the side of the mat with Ole in attendance. Yeah, I bet that's great. I bet Ole had a very intense way of watching that kind of wrestling. I'm sure that's probably pretty fascinating to see. Paul Moon, if you just joined us and you want to be a part of our bracket challenge, especially for those of you who are regular cool down participants, it's folks like you that I'd really love to have in here, because you're a big part of what we do on a regular basis anyway. So can we throw up the gorgeous presentation that it is our Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge? Do we have the ability to throw that on the screen one more time? If you want to be here, my email, brandon.adams. And many of you have emailed me before, and you say, well, BA, you didn't respond to my email. I'm not the world's greatest email guy always, but we're gonna really try to make this a thing. brandon.adams@DawgNation.com. Just send me your name, email, mailing address, phone number. I'm going to reach out to you, tell you how to be a part of this, and we're going to try to give away a good number of prizes. The grand prize winner is going to get a chance to come on the air and celebrate their win. So that should be, I think, a great experience. And hopefully we're going to have – this is why I'm getting your mailing address, because I may have some other prizes too. And when I say may, I mean may. This is – of all the bracket challenges all the media companies are going to do here over the course of the next 7 days, what I can tell you is this is also one of them. That's the extent of promise that I'm looking to make here. This isn't a clever spin on this. This isn't like a fun new way of doing it. This is just, we haven't done this in a while, and I kind of wanted to do it. So there you go. Pop on, be a part of this. Send me your name, email, mailing address, phone number to brandon.adams@DawgNation.com, and we will have a good time with that. So, Cassie, I hope you do it, and I will look forward to having all of you be a part of it there as well. Now, let me tell you who's probably in about 1,000 different bracket challenges this week, because if I know him, I know he probably is. That's our buddy Dari Payro from RS Andrews. So Dari's a fun guy, loves sports, great to hang out with, and the people at RS Andrews are just good people there as well. So I want you to find them online at rsandrews.com. You mentioned air conditionings earlier in the show. It's about to be warm. Now, it's going to be cold some this week, I think, but eventually it's sort of spring and it just sort of stays here and becomes summer. That means your air conditioning unit needs to be ready for what's on the way. So I want you to find them online, rsandrews.com. That old air conditioning unit that somebody's told you needs to be replaced, one of these days it probably does. But in the meantime, you may be able to get some new life out of that old unit, and it may only cost you $99. So go to rsandrews.com, find out more. That's rsandrews.com. They bring the RS Andrews cool down to you each and every day. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.